I had a little bird. Its name was Enza. I opened the window, and influenza. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 was one of the greatest medical disasters of the 20th century. It was a global pandemic and airborne virus which affected every continent. It was nicknamed the Spanish flu as the first reported cases were in Spain. As this was during World War I, newspapers were censored. Germany, the United States, and Britain all had media blackouts on news that might lower morale. So, although there were influenza or flu cases elsewhere, it was the Spanish case that hit the headlines. Welcome to the History Book, short snippets of history which are odd or lesser known, and I try to keep videos at 5 to 7 minutes long, just enough to keep your interest and that you can move forward with the rest of your day. If you do like the content, consider subscribing. And if you really do like the content, please consider getting on board with our Patreon account. Every dollar helps out with the channel. So thank you so much. Here's the rest of the video. Although not caused by World War I, it is thought that the virus was spread by soldiers returning home from the trenches in northern France. Soldiers were becoming ill with sore throats and headaches, loss of appetite. Although highly infectious in the cramped primitive conditions of the trenches, recovery was usually swift, and doctors at first called it three-day fever. The outbreak hit in a series of waves, with its peak at the end of World War I. Returning home from northern France at the end of the war, the troops traveled home by train. As they arrived in the railway stations from cramped cars, the flu spread from railway stations to the center of cities where there were celebrations, and then to the suburbs and out to the countryside. Not restricted to class, anyone could catch it. 4 out of 5 who contracted it actually survived. Some notable survivors included Walt Disney, President Woodrow Wilson, Mahatma Gandhi, Greta Garbo, and Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Adults between 20 and 40 years old were particularly affected, and the disease struck and progressed quickly in these cases. The onset was devastatingly quick. Those fine and healthy at breakfast were dead by midday. Within hours of feeling the first symptoms of fatigue, fever, and headache, some victims would rapidly develop pneumonia and start turning blue, thus signaling the shortage of oxygen. They would then struggle for air until they suffocated to death. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and even medical students were drafted to help. Doctors and nurses worked to the breaking point, although there was little they could do as there were no treatments for the flu and no antibiotics to treat pneumonia. During the pandemic of 1918 to 1919, over 50 million people died worldwide, and a quarter of the U.S. population was affected. The death toll was between 675,000 and maybe 800,000 in the U.S. alone. Global mortality rate is not known, but it is estimated to have been more than 10 to 20% of those who were infected. More people died of influenza in that single year than in the 4 years of the bubonic plague. By the end of the pandemic, only one region in the entire world had not reported an outbreak. It was an isolated island called Morgues, located in Brazil's Amazon River Delta. A lot of the influenza stories and information get swept under the carpet because of, well, World War I had ended and peace had just been secured. The last thing people wanted to know was that a worldwide disease was killing more people than a war that had just gripped the world. Now you know your history.